Welcome back to Carneades.org. Today we're going to be continuing with our series, Dumbfounding Definitions, Dizzying Distinctions, and Diabolical Doctrines, a series sorting through some of the jargon of philosophy. In this video, we're going to be continuing our mini-series on what is nationalism, looking at the difference between nations and countries. Now, in colloquial speech, the terms nation, country, and state are often used interchangeably. Within political philosophy, however, the terms state and country are generally used synonymously, with the exception of referring to specific states within the United States of America, for example. But generally, the definitions of state and country will be used interchangeably. For Americans, think of your Secretary of State isn't worried about the individual states, he's worried about matters of state, as in talking to other countries. So, however, there is a real distinction made between nations and countries within political philosophy. So, a country or state is designated based on the level of power of the institution. According to the SEP, a state is a political entity with a high degree of sovereignty. Basically, it is a government with a sufficiently high level of control over the internal and external affairs of its citizens. This is what we commonly think of when we talk about a country, whether it's the UK, China, the US, or the Gambia. When you're looking at a map and you see the things that are divided by borders, you're usually talking about a country, because that is identifying the governance structures that have a sufficient amount of power to have power over their citizens. Now, there may be arguments about whether a place like Somalia is actually a country, because there's not a single entity that has sufficient power over its citizens to really be called a state. But those are borderline cases. The general cases that we can think of something like Canada, there's a clear idea of what we're thinking about when we're talking about a state. Now, nations are something different. Nations, on the other hand, are more amorphous. They're communities that share a common culture or ethnicity. These can overlap with countries, but not always. The country of Japan, for example, is the government that has power over its people, while the nation of Japan is the people in that country that share a common cultural and ethnic heritage. Some citizens of the country of Japan may not be part of the nation of Japan due to a lack of common culture or heritage, and different nations define themselves in different ways. Some nations may define themselves based on their set of beliefs or their cultural beliefs, whereas others may define themselves explicitly ethnically in terms of a biologic or hereditary connection to certain people or individuals in the past. Now, there are often nations without countries, and countries with many nations within them. The Kurdish people are arguably a nation without a state. They share a common heritage, but there is no state that takes that ethnic and cultural identity as its central feature. Nations can overlap as well. People from the Senegambia region share a similar, unique culture in a broad sense, and therefore may be considered a single nation. Within that nation, there are two states or governments, Senegal and the Gambia, and multiple ethnically defined nations within that kind of broad nation of Senegambia, such as Wolofs, Mandinkas, Fulas, Sarahules, etc. A single person may be part of multiple nations due to a range of factors, such as having multiple ethnicities or cultures. Someone with parents from different ethnicities, or who was raised in multiple cultures, traveling around and experiencing different things. Layered ethnicities, someone might identify as ethnically Welsh, but also ethnically British and ethnically white in ever-enlarging spheres of ethnicities, or overlaps of culture and ethnicity. Someone might identify as culturally French, but ethnically black. Nation-states are countries which are bound together by a common nationality. So, moving on from our ideas of a definition of a nation versus a definition of a country or state, you have also things that are considered a nation state. The idea that you have a combination of both your nation, your cultural or ethnic identity, and your governance, that you are governed by something that is aligned with your cultural or ethnic identity, either through the ethics that they have, the values that they practice, because those are in line with the cultural beliefs that you have, or simply because they are representative of the ethnicities or populations that exist within your culture. Nation states are countries that are bound together by a common nationality, depending on what that means. This may be a shared national ethnicity, where only individuals who share a common ancestry can be citizens. Conversely, it may be a shared national culture, where the distinguishing fact is one's values, beliefs, and cultural practices, not one's heritage, that binds the country together. And those beliefs and values, someone may newly adopt those beliefs and values and therefore start being considered a part of that nation. You might think of a religious or theocratic nation as an example of this, of something where someone may come in and accept those religious principles, and therefore, regardless of kind of their previous ethnic background or even cultural background, they're accepted into that nation because they have adopted or accepted that set of beliefs that is a requisite part of being part of that nation. So, not all countries are bound together by shared ethnicity or culture, or the culture that they have that does bind them together may be comparatively weak to the stronger cultural bonds of nations that exist within them or expand beyond their borders. Many were drawn arbitrarily by colonial powers or are purposefully collections of many different cultures and ethnicities. So this discussion raises questions of whether or not all nations should be given states to govern themselves. This is the second question that we'll be looking at in our three positions for the rest of the series. Should the world be separate by ethnicity or culture? Or should we strive for more pluralist and diverse societies? One might think that all nations without a state deserve a country of their own, because otherwise they're being governed and judged and possibly put in prison by members of a different nation who might not share their cultural beliefs or ideals. However, one might conversely think that the integration of diverse cultures makes a society stronger, and that by bringing nations and cultures together, a country will grow strong because it will be the people that govern it and have power will be from many nations and many different cultures, and therefore bring those perspectives to bear on policy problems that are presented to them. Someone that thinks that the Kurds should have a state based on their ethnicity, because we think that you should be allowed to have nation states based on ethnicity, may also be committed to the claim that Norwegians should be able to expel anyone from Norway that isn't ethnically Norwegian and ban immigration. Someone that believes immigration and naturalization is good because it spreads wealth and prosperity around to nations that are traditionally and historically disadvantaged may also be committed to the claim that ethnic groups that have never had a state should not have one and should simply integrate with other ethnicities, because if they were given a state, it would further separate the population, divide people, and build barriers between people as opposed to bringing individuals together. So those are some of the ideas that we're going to be tackling with. We're going to dig into them in a lot more detail in the next three videos, but that's just a little bit of a taste. We'll cover the three positions on nationalism in the remains of the series. But for now, what do you think? Should all ethnic nations have their own states? What about cultural nations? Should they have their own states? Should there be any states that are based on ethnicity? Are there some states that should be allowed to be based on ethnicity and others that shouldn't? If so, why? Offer your thoughts in the comments below. Watch this video and more here at Carneades.org, and stay skeptical, everybody.